moment here with very minimal video that I'm using mostly just to remember what I'm doing. And who knows, I might release it. You never can tell. The goldenrod flat that I made to go in my Damascus yesterday, I only used a half a rod, and I don't think I got enough. So I'm going to remake this. I'll keep the other one. It'll probably be useful for something. Looks like a full rod is a good size. Got a bit of extra glass on the end here, and there it goes, popping off. I'm debating on whether or not I should just video every single thing I do. Who knows? Maybe someday I'll do something really amazing and want to remember it. Okay, so adjusting the torch, a tiny bit of blue knob, a lot of oxygen, making an oxidizing flame, trying to avoid boiling this crayon color. I am having a certain amount of luck, but not perfect. I'm doing a little preheating. Seems to be working somewhat well. Still debating on whether or not to make a compressed air manifold. Some say it works really well. Others say just learn to use your torch. The torch has the capability for anything you need, just as it is. Getting fairly good control of boiling here. Glass is going on pretty smooth. Getting a little better at the wadding operation. It still isn't perfect, but seems to be a little bit better every time I do it. I'm also getting a little bit better at synchronizing the right-hand punty, keeping it on center. I still tend to sometimes go a little too fast. But this is excellent practice. Doing pretty good at keeping the boiling under control. I see some very tiny little sparkles on the surface. I'm not sure if it's air or if it's minimal boiling, but I have an oxidizing flame. I'm in the far end of the flame. I'm not quite sure what else I can do to make it better. It's looking pretty shiny and pretty glass-like. I don't really see any of the little sparkles that indicate, there's one. that indicate surface degradation due to overheating. Slightly thicker end on the punty helps this process a little. Able to heat it very close to the end without getting too floppy, and pretty much get it finished to size in the Inquala without having to switch to handwork. So, get it striped and see how it squeezes. Trying to be very careful to not overheat the substrate so I get a uniform stripe. Jet black is going on very nicely. Edges are welding together very nicely. This is going to go on a 11-layer kind of glass experiment inspired by Damascus making that I've been watching YouTube blacksmiths doing. That is looking pretty good on the hand torch. As I practice and do a number of these, they seem to be getting easier and better. Easier, better, and maybe even a little faster. Using a bit of a hotter flame, trying to get the surface nice and hot to smooth it out. Without getting the core too floppy. Okay, that may be the best one yet. Very nicely uniform cylinder. Okay, got the squeezer ready. And then the trick here is to use a little bit of gravity get the piece to sag just a little bit and thin out in the center, and then when I put it in the squeezer, the sag kind of counteracts the tendency of it to bulge in the center. And I get a somewhat more parallel side. And then I'm not going to be using marvering. I'm going to try to see if I can improve the parallelism with gravity. Because I believe that if I marver this guy, I'm going to get some distortion in the corners that I don't want. I want this to be a very much uniform outside coating. Boy, this one overall is the best one yet. Now that is exceptionally parallel. Give it one more. Heat the end by the punty a little bit. And one more kind of cleanup squeeze. And that, best one ever, without a doubt. Best one ever. In the kiln. Okay, now time to make some bullseyes. And I'm going to be using probably my favorite combinations. Cherry, canary, and jet black. And going to be making this one a little shorter than I typically make them. I had been making them 3 1/4, 3 1/2. But in this case, I'm going to make it a little under 3, 2 7/8. And check my plan again. It's a cherry red center. Next layer, canary. And then outside layer, black. And I'll be using my rod stack technique with stainless safety wire and the squeezer with hexagonal iris dies. As I experiment more, I'm finding that the rod stack method works very well for some things and not so well for others, and it's just a question of when to use it and when not to use it. And the safety wire plier works exceptionally well, so well that sometimes I can get it over twisted before the rods are all in place and not be able to get it into place, get it adjusted properly, which kind of sucks. So rods will be assembled here without preheating. And this one, is going to be pulled down to probably a 10 millimeter size or so. Kind of don't care about ugly boily crap on the end of the punty, but I kind of do. I'm not really exactly sure how careful I have to be. practiced this so many times that it's starting to become a very reliable method with very little chance of failure. Return to the more oxidizing flame. And then while the ends are heating, check the squeezer dies for radiant heat. The quick disconnect on the squeezer is working exceptionally well. This is the design. I was a tiny bit skeptical at first, but it has proven to be a really good design. And of course, I'm still debating whether or not to offer the squeezer as a commercial product. It's a lot of work to make one, and it probably would have to be sold for a fairly high price. And I'm not sure if there's actually a market for it. Far flame, oxidizing flame, very gentle heating. In the 5-layer video that I did, the 5-layer murrine bullseye, I used North Star Skyline in the rod stack, and it worked just awful. Despite taking what I believe to be great care in avoiding boiling, it ended up looking like Swiss cheese. It also really didn't keep its color. Like, not only did it boil like crazy, so it ended up looking like a sponge, but what was left was completely washed out and pretty awful looking, so I actually consider that piece of glass to be fairly close to catastrophic failure, although I did get some video making experience, and all learning is good learning. So far, this looks very free of boiling, nice and shiny. I don't see any dangerous looking sparkles on the surface. I'm pushing down a little while squeezing. trying to get a slightly fatter, slightly shorter result. And what this does, it ends up producing, when the outer black layer is on, if I make the center a little thicker and shorter, it makes the black layer thinner when the whole thing is pulled down. And that's what I want for this design. I want a thin black outline. Yep. Seems to be going faster, and result is coming out more predictably better. I've done many of these, and they definitely do improve with practice. So that's a nice hexagon. I'm going to start rounding it out a little bit. Still looking shiny. Still looking like glass. Okay, that's getting pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfectly round for this operation. Gotta watch out. I thought I saw a little evidence of boiling trouble there. Slightly modifying my procedure here. I'm going to have another color rod at the ready. I'm going to let the thing cool a little more than I did in the first video, because in the first video I started work when the substrate was too hot, and this caused it to droop a little. And even while I was talking about avoiding overheating the substrate, even while I was talking, I was overheating the substrate a little bit. Everything seems to be working extremely well. Stripes are going on very nicely. Pretty uniform. Don't want to get that back in too cold, because that is where it will crack. Starting to learn to manipulate the rod to be able to correct for unevenness. Of course, the ultimate goal is not to correct for unevenness, it's just to put them down correctly as they go. But it's all about being in control of the glass. Oh, this is going to be close. And I do not believe that I'm going to be able to get that last stripe out of that little stub of rod, so lock off the twist axis, take care of the nubbins, take away a little bit of the oxygen since I don't need a super oxidizing flame for the jet black. Getting a little closer to the flame here. This technique appears to be very efficiently heating the surface without getting the core too hot. And giving me a very nice uniform cylinder in a fairly short amount of time. So that seems to be a very effective solution here. And once again, I kind of forgot to prepare my punty. I wanted to get rid of the colored glass on the end, but I need to get out of the habit of letting glass explode. It actually accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, which is to get me down to clear glass, but I don't like exploding. It could potentially be dangerous, so. Need to get a little better at that. That was a nice attachment. Get it ready for pulling here. I'm still pulling by hand, although probably would be a good idea to start practicing pulling on the inkwalla. Concentrating the heat on the ends and trying to observe the heat. Observation, how it feels in the hand. Got the left-hand handle a little too hot, but I don't believe this is going to be, blowing on it a little bit, don't believe this is going to be a problem that still haven't figured out how to get one the perfect size in one pull. It really is all about uniform heat, understanding the heat, managing the heat. But My workaround seems to be producing, if not perfect, at least serviceable results. I don't really care a whole lot about this end. And it's probably not that good, but practice is practice. Some of these things, it's almost like I'm not even pulling, like I'm thinking about pulling. And that is imperfect but adequate and will be useful for the next step. So into the kiln it goes. And I'm going to get me a punty ready for the next one so I don't have that same problem again. I'm using, I don't know what this is, 12 or 15 millimeter rod. I like the larger diameter rods for this kind of work. I think hand workers tend to use small handles because it's easier to spin by hand. For work on the Inquala, I kind of like the larger diameter. So let that cook in the outer flame for a moment while I get the rods for the next bullseye, which will be an opaque aqua center. And surrounded by lava is another one of my favorite colors. Although I do need to break out of my standard color combinations and start experimenting with other colors. I don't want to keep making the same thing over and over again, but always a kind of a dilemma. You know, go with what you know, or try something new. When I tried the skyline, it was not a very pleasant experience. But it's how you learn. And that is the stack getting a lot better at forming these punties and moils on the Inkwalla. Trying to get a nice uniform taper here on center. And it seems like every one I do gets a little bit better. So there, that one's not bad at all. Let me move this rod holder over to the side so the handle of the rod doesn't get over hot with radiant heat. There we have a nice accurate placement and just adjust it a little bit. Get it on center. Build up a bit of thickness at the taper, and return the flame to its more oxidizing state. Cut off the safety wire. And get that fire on it. I'm picking up the pieces of glass that resulted from that explosion, even though it accomplished what I needed to accomplish. I really don't like exploding glass in the glassworking shop. I need to get better about that. Okay, I can, as I take the piece out of the flame and look at it, I can see some core heat starting to develop inside. Also see some twist developing, which need to get that somewhat under control. And first squeeze just for tagging. If I try to get the glass too hot before the first squeeze, the rods start bulging out because they're not tagged together in the center. Of course, as I'm doing this, every time the outside of the glass hits the graphite, it cools, and that allows me to build core heat in the center without overheating the outside edges. Focusing on the far end at the moment. And now, focusing at the punty side. Saw a couple of little sparkles there. Don't like those sparkles. That came together pretty quickly. And that will be the final squeeze. And then I start rounding up. Let me try rounding up in the inkwalla. Yeah, it's working, but it's introducing more of a twist than I would like. But it sure is fast. Yep. Yeah, that was faster than doing it by hand. So that looks about ready for striping. Concentrating almost all of the flame on the color rod with just a little bit of the spill from the edge and the radiant heat going onto the substrate. When making these videos, there's always the question, how much do I show? How much do I speed up? How much do I edit out? Because glasswork can be slow, and I'm not sure how many people would actually devote 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours to watching the process. But for a new student, learning the timing is really important. Learning how long it takes to get the glass up to temperature. Because going too fast, overheating the glass, not allowing time for the heat to soak into the core, these are all common beginner mistakes. And it's almost impossible to learn timing from an edited and sped up video. So the answer may be to provide full-length versions for those who care, and also provide edited and sped-up versions for those who already understand timing and just may be curious about some of the technique, and once they see it, they can go, oh yeah, got it, on to the next technique. I ordered a GoPro camera to complete my 4-camera setup. I've got 3 almost identical Canon camcorders and my Sony still camera. And although the still camera does video, it's a still camera. And it has some very annoying quirks, like shutting down when I'm not paying attention, causing me to miss large sections that I really wanted to have a record of. Boy, that's about the fastest rounding out yet. What I did there? Whoa! There's some excitement for you. What I did there okay, getting everything back under control. What I did there was let the piece get closer to the flame, so I was concentrating on fairly aggressively heating the surface, of course being careful to avoid boiling it, without letting the inside get too loose and floppy. And this allowed me to smooth off the outside very, very quickly and efficiently. Turning the rod a little bit to the side, kind of even up the attachment. Doesn't have to be a perfect attachment, but always nice to practice just doing the best work I can do. And starting to pour some heat into it. Once again, I'm switching to handwork to do the pull. Doing a combination of feeling the glass, looking at the glass, trying to figure out what's the heat doing. Looks like I got a couple of small bubbles. So my aggressive outside heating technique may have been a bit too aggressive. It's all about balance. Everything in glasswork is all about balance. As I take it out of the flame, and see how it's cooling, that gives me a little bit more insight into what my core heat is doing. So, take it out, let it stabilize for a moment, blow on the center. I want this one to be a little bit smaller in diameter. That's not bad at all. Still struggling with bulges. Haven't quite developed the control. And really it's all about heat management. But when I was heating that knuckle and trying to concentrate the heat on the big end, and trying to keep the heat away from the small end. And even while I was thinking about it, I overheated the small end. And then when it pulled, it resulted in a bulge. But I am somewhat able, not perfectly, but somewhat able to overcome that and to kind of fix it, although a pull that's perfect with the perfect heat and one uniform pull is always going to be the best. Some of the more experienced, more competent glassworkers that I've seen are able to keep the big end hot precisely and pull at a very uniform rate. And it just seems like you just pull it right out. Now that, even though it takes me a lot longer to fight the bulges, the final result is kind of almost good. Of course, the section that was pulled uniformly in one pull is the best part, but the part with the bulges in it will still be usable. It's a weird shape I haven't seen before. Okay. That, imperfect, but I believe it will be completely useful and as good as it needs to be to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish.